A prince must imitate the fox and the lion, for the lion cannot protect himself from traps, and the fox cannot defend himself from wolves. One must therefore be a fox to recognize traps and a lion to frighten wolves. Those who rely simply on the lion do not understand what they are about. Therefore, a wise ruler ought never to keep faith when by doing so it would be against his interests, and when the reasons which made him promise no longer exist. If men were entirely good, this precept would not hold, but because they are bad and will not keep faith with you, you too are not bound to observe it with them. Niccolo Machiavelli, The Prince, Chapter 18, In What Way Princes Must Keep Faith. Cesare Borgia, the son of Pope Alexander VI, was establishing a new Italian state near Florence in 1502 with his father's support. After conquering the city of Cesena, Borgia delegated the task of restoring order to his right-hand man, Ramiro de Orco. He instructed de Orco to use any means necessary, no matter how ruthless, cruel, or horrific. De Orco complied, executing men in front of their families, confiscating property, and castrating anyone who opposed his rule. Once this brutal peace was achieved, Borgia returned to Cesena. Borgia found out that the townspeople now hated Dorco and, by extension, hated him as well. After all, Dorco had spent months killing their fathers, castrating their brothers, and abusing their wives. So one night, Borgia ordered his men to cut Dorco's body into 2 pieces and put these pieces, along with his severed head, on a stick in the middle of the town square. The next morning the townspeople woke up and saw de Orco's mutilated remains on full display. Since they hated de Orco, they were quite pleased about this. Borgia then addressed his citizens with blatant deceit, claiming that de Orco had seized power and acted entirely on his own without Borgia's permission to commit such atrocities. He described de Orco as a savage, sadistic psychopath and told the people that he had saved them from this monster. Borgia insisted that Dorco's level of cruelty and disobedience couldn't be tolerated in the great society he was trying to build. Borgia's actions were ruthless, severe, and a deeply underhanded betrayal of one of his closest allies. In The Prince, Machiavelli consistently expresses profound admiration for Cesare Borgia, praising him as essentially the ideal leader. You see, Machiavelli thought that being good was acceptable, even wonderful. However, you couldn't always be good and a successful leader. Politics was a never-ending game of chess to Machiavelli. It naturally requires slyness and devious thought. This perspective leads us to one of his most famous assertions regarding leadership and human nature. On this, a question arises whether it be better to be loved than feared or feared than loved. It may be answered that one should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them in one person, it is much safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Because this is to be asserted in general of men, that they are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, and as long as you succeed they are yours entirely. They will shed blood for you, risk their property, life, and children when the danger is removed, but when it approaches, they turn against you. And that prince who, relying entirely on their promises, takes no other precautions, is ruined, because friendships that are bought rather than achieved by greatness or nobility of mind may indeed be earned, but they are not long-lasting, and in time of crisis cannot be relied upon, and men have less scruple in offending one who is beloved than one who is feared. For love is preserved by a bond which, due to the failings of men, is broken at every opportunity to their advantage. But fear is strengthened by the dread of punishment, which is always effective. This statement by Machiavelli is arguably his most famous and is often misunderstood. Ideally, Machiavelli argued that a ruler should strive to be both feared and loved. However, he realistically observed that these 2 qualities rarely align in practice. Machiavelli argues that individuals are inherently unreliable. Among them are cowards, liars, those susceptible to bribery, and those prone to changing their allegiance. Regardless of professed affection, Machiavelli asserts that these traits persist. However, he argues that fear serves as a lasting form of discipline, a palpable threat ensuring perpetual obedience. Machiavelli advocates for the use of cruelty, not as an end in itself, but solely for the purpose of aiding the prince in safeguarding the stability of the state. A prince who uses his power to safeguard his people and doesn't interfere excessively in their lives can be feared, but not hated. Machiavelli cautioned that harboring hate towards a leader often instigates violent conspiracies. When resorting to acts of cruelty or violence, it is advisable to execute them swiftly and discreetly to mitigate the risk of stirring up resentment among the populace. On the whole, the best fortress you can have is in not being hated by your subjects. If they hate you, no fortress will save you, Machiavelli said. A prince must only use violence when necessary and should abstain from hurting his subjects or taking their belongings in order to instill fear without inciting hatred. The people's lives and belongings must not be severely disrupted by the prince's acts, even if it is imperative that the threat of punishment be made obvious in order to keep power. If punishment is necessary, it should be applied with clear explanations, particularly in situations involving potential death. Machiavelli cautions against seizing individuals' property because he believes people are more likely to forgive the loss of a loved one than the confiscation of their possessions. He suggests that people are primarily self-interested and will support a ruler only as long as it serves their own interests, by using Girolamo Savonarola as an example, whose popularity declined when he could no longer benefit his followers. Essentially, Machiavelli claims that whereas love is volatile, fear of punishment is a consistent force. As a result, when rulers are judged on their power, those who create terror are stronger than those who only rely on love. But the most powerful princes are those who can arouse both love and terror, or at the very least, keep from becoming hated. Thus, a prince must be strong and resolute in his acts, even if it occasionally involves using harshness. But he must do so in a way that does not incite the public to hate him in a general way.